Hi, I'm Sam Candy. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today, I'm joined by Katherine Ann Byam MBA, who's a best-selling author, activist, coach, consultant, and fellow podcast founder of Where Ideas Launch. Katherine is also the founder of Facebook group Women in Sustainable Business, which is where we met. Hi, Katherine. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really good. Thanks for having me, Sam. Really nice to have this chat with you. I know we've been waiting for quite a while.
I know, we finally got round to it. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and your career and what's been happening?
Yeah, so it's been quite a journey for me to get to this point. And, you know, people who've gone through these different transitions in their life probably know a bit about this. But I started as an accountant. So I qualified as an accountant a long time ago, longer than I'd probably like to admit. And I worked for an investment bank first. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not sure that this is what I expected when I joined this field, right? You know, it's like you're sold on these careers, you know, it was lead or deal, those careers, you know, doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, you know. And I thought to myself, maybe this is not the be all and end all of things. And then I got a job for Big Tobacco, and I worked there for a long time. And that opportunity was incredibly different. It allowed me to see the world in a very different way. So I started traveling a lot. I met people from so many different cultures, something like 150 cultures in the end of it. And this really opened my eyes, my mind, my heart, I think, as well, to how other people live and how the rest of the world lives. You know, growing up in a small island, Trinidad and Tobago, you have certain thoughts and, you know, interpretations of how the world is, what the world really is. And the minute you start traveling and moving around, those perceptions start to shift and you start to question your own beliefs about things. So that's kind of what happened to me. I started traveling. I was an internal audit at this time. And I started to see things that really made my heart open up. You know, when you look at, you know, farming and how children are working on farms in some of these smaller countries. You look at things like the sort of quality of life, how people trade, economics, and you start to understand that maybe the story you've been sold is not the one that's real. So that made me curious and made me want to start making some pivotal shifts. So I moved away from internal audits and accounting into supply chain, because I thought that supply chain is a really interesting space to really understand. I think it's the backbone of the business. If you don't get your supply chain right, you don't get much right. And it's actually the backbone of much of what ESG is, right? So 80% of the sort of ESG changes we need to make in the world come in the supply chain. So it was a really good experience for me to have that. I did that for around 7 years before I decided to go off on my own. And going off on my own was preempted by a couple of things. I took a break. I took a career break to do an MBA. I don't think many people take sabbaticals to do MBAs, but that's what I did. And I don't think many people do MBAs to go away and become a sustainability activist. But that's kind of what happened to me as well. I did my MBA in France, and the French education system is quite different. It's very inclusive in what they teach you. They really try to give you some very broad perspectives. And we did a course on geopolitics. And I really started to understand the importance of resources. And it's not something that probably we talked about a lot in school, for me at least, at first when I went to school. We didn't talk about the Club of Rome report. We didn't talk about that 1974 report where we saw the impact of the resource utilization we were doing. We didn't discuss any of those things. But in this geopolitical course, I really understood that a lot of what we're seeing today in terms of the wars with Russia, China, and all that's happening is because of resources. And we've been trying somehow to divorce ourselves from this resource reality for so long that we've become numb to it. You know, there's this expectation that everything is abundant. You know, I hear entrepreneurs talking about this all the time, you know, and this is not the reality at all. So understanding these things made me really want to do something more, really want to get involved. And that's why I decided to make that pivotal shift eventually in 2019 when I started my own business. And it's kind of like I was moving away from sort of big corporate and moving to something that I didn't really know, but I just knew what I wanted it to be, right? I knew the purpose that I wanted to serve. I knew the passion I had for this subject, for meeting all these different people whose lives I wanted to impact. And it was just about trying to figure out the best vehicle to have the impact that I really wanted to have. So that's a bit of my story and how I came to this point.
Wow, that's such a fascinating story, and you've obviously put a lot of work in getting to where you are today. You then started Women in Sustainable Business. When did that happen, and how did that happen? And I mean, it's just such a fabulous group. It's so supportive of people that are working with a passion for purpose-driven careers, right?
Yeah, and this is funny because I'm not exactly the founder. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this happened. So it was October 2020 that I joined this group. It was only about 500 people at the time. And I started to talk about my podcast because my podcast had just been released, and I knew that it would find a home in people who were already into sustainability and those sort of conversations. So I joined the group and I started to invite people to come talk to me. Basically, you have a sustainable business. If you want to talk to me, I'm here. And I want to bring your story to the world. And the founder of the group, her name was Jacinta. She had been looking for someone with a business background to help her with the group because she felt as if the group was growing beyond what she felt she could do. She was just a small business owner who just wanted company, really, on her journey. And so she wrote to me and she said, look, I've been looking for someone like you for some time now, and I think you're the right person. Will you accept my invitation to take the group? And she didn't want anything. She didn't want any credit for it. I always credit her whenever I talk about the group, but she didn't want any credit for it. She was like, no, I'm ready to move on. I'm changing countries. You know, you take the group. And what I wanted to do was to keep the spirit of what she'd started, right? Because what she had was the space that, you know, women felt comfortable to come and ask questions, to just be supported on their journey, to, you know, to make that sort of pivotal shift with company and not alone. So I wanted to keep that sort of energy going with the group. I didn't want to, you know, make it one of these groups where it's just a vehicle for getting people to buy stuff, right? I really wanted it to be a space that people felt safe. So what I did at the beginning was to stop people from just posting their links, because that's what was starting to happen. People would just come into the group and say, okay, I'm going to try to get a sale. So I'm going to post my link and then I'm going to run away. And you could see that the engagement was quite low on posts. People would view the posts, but they won't really engage, they won't talk, they won't ask questions. So I kind of paused the ability to write just, you know, post with links, and encourage people to ask questions, but it was repeated. It was basically every week welcoming people to the group and reinforcing this idea that the group is there for you to ask questions, to share, etc. And now the group has grown into 4,400, I think, last time I checked. And really people get the ethos, right? So when I look at the statistics now, the ones that get the most engagement tend to be where people ask brilliant questions, and people start talking about it and discussing their own journey with these things. Those tend to get the highest number of views. When you post your links, it doesn't get as many views, not nearly. And it's actually created that vibe that I wanted it to have. So I'm really pleased with what's happened with the group. And one thing I want to say about that, I mean, this is a question actually I got asked this morning, so it's quite topical. But there aren't a lot of women that look like me in Western Europe, let's say, or in the US, who are championing sustainability. Right? Yes, there are many in Africa, right? There are many women in Africa who are championing this cause, women in the Caribbean, women in those SID states, which are, you know, susceptible to sinking potentially if climate change doesn't, you know, or temperature rises don't stop. But there are not a lot of people like me who represent these thoughts and ideas in the sort of developed world. And that's a concern, right? That's a concern. And I've often wondered why, because for me, it seems so clear that this is something that I would get behind, because, you know, I come from a place that could be in climate jeopardy very soon. So I think it's really important that I represent this group and that I bring more people. I show people like me that it's okay to stand for these ideas, to stand for these principles, that it's not just about, you know, having the great career, it's having the great career that has an impact. that really makes a difference. So that's been, I think, a key part of my story with this group as well. It's like, I think I'm probably of maybe less than 2% of the group that is my skin color, which is
You're
fascinating.
so right. I'm always looking for Black women to interview on my podcast, and I've got to be honest, it's there's like a lot of white men that will accept to be interviewed, and I have to go and really search hard for women. Like, they don't put themselves forward as much as men do. When I'm running webinars, I try to make sure that the panel is is diverse, and it's not easy to find people. And I always encourage people that maybe would not put themselves forward. I'll reach out to them and say, hey, I want to do an interview with you. But I think I have a webinar coming up on diversity, equity and inclusion, actually, that talks about exactly this. We need to, and actually, going back to the group, I found it so supportive and welcoming and comfortable, and I think that's really important with a group, to have a safe space that you can say anything and not feel silly. But having watched the group grow over the last year, I've seen lots and lots of different businesses. Do you think there's been a bit of a trend with the type of businesses that, because obviously this is yes, it's supporting women in business, but it's sustainability. So what kind of trends do you think you've seen in
Yeah, I think there are two that stand out for me. So the first is in the sort of physical product space. It's the fashion trend. So really having sustainable fashion, reuse things, recycle things, upcycle things. Those tend to be quite popular. The brand that I know that's doing probably the best since I have the group is a lady by the name of Nicole Broad, who has the Fruit Mart. And what she does is she upcycles men's shirts, as well as use dead stock to make newer things, or recycles things like umbrellas into hats and things like this. So it's quite cool stuff. Yeah, it's really quite cool stuff. And when you see people, taking the initiative and doing things like this, you're quite excited to be a part of their story and their journey. And Nicole has been accepted on Not From the High Street. So that's a UK brand that's quite quirky. So she's been really fortunate to have that opportunity. So that's been definitely an uptick on the sort of recycled, upcycled. And then the second one is actually services, right? So there are loads of people who are wanting to do service-based work with people who are in that sustainability niche, because they want more purpose to what they do. They don't just want to sell stuff. They don't just want to help any brand sell stuff. They want to help sustainable brands to sell better. So that's also been really encouraging. If it's a Pinterest expert or an Instagram expert or whatever, they come into the group to try to meet those product-based brands who might need that extra support. And then, there's definitely a community-based feel to it. So it's like giving advice, giving support, but also doing one-to-one. So people tend to use the group to get practice as well if they're building out their skill. So they will offer, like, maybe the first 3 people, take a one-to-one with me. Let's look at your business. Let's see how we can help you. So those 2 things have been quite emergent.
Yeah, that brings us on nicely. You have just released your book, which is amazing. Congratulations. How exciting. What a journey. Tell us more about it.
So let me give you a quick view of the book. So this is the book. So I'll tell you a little bit about the cover. So the girl on the cover was actually me when I was studying in France. So I basically wanted to cycle everywhere I went when I went to France, but I did live quite far away from my university. But the thing that I loved about France is that you can easily get fresh produce that's biological, like no sort of GMOs and stuff like this. That's very easy to get. You always have a baguette. you can't live in France without a baguette. Like that's literally rite of passage. And it was all about schoolwork and sort of learning new things and all of that. And I felt like it was probably one of the happier times of my life, just sort of enjoying being part of nature and the reality of life when it's a slower town, right? It was in Grenoble, which is a bit slower than Paris, let's say.
Yeah.
So that was a really nice experience. And what I wanted to bring out is that, you know, it's like purpose is a lot of things, and certainly sustainability is a lot of things. But there's so many ways in both your life and in what you do for work that you can make that effort to be more sustainable. And it's not something like, you don't all have to work for NGOs, or nobody has to, you know, quit their jobs and go off and do something different like I did. That's one choice. Definitely it's a choice. But you can literally do stuff where you are and make a difference. And that's what this book is about, right? So it's called Do What Matters, the Purpose-Driven Career Transition Guide. And I start the book talking about three main themes, which is basically the whole ESG conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I first go into the environmental piece, and I look at what's actually on the table, what we need to change, what's happening, and how your skills can help. So obviously for the environmental piece, you probably need more of a science base. But the messaging in the book is that we all need to understand conceptually what's happening, because we need more systems thinking in order to make these changes happen. But it's not just the scientists that are going to make the difference. It's not just, in fact, no. I would argue that storytellers have the biggest role to play in what comes next, because the biggest damage to our societies has been in the stories that we believed, right? So I would argue that storytellers will make the biggest difference in what comes next. And then I get into society and sort of the social side of this, because there's so much social impact and social justice concerns about what's happening, right? It's not just DEI, it's all the things related to climate jeopardy and immigration that we're going to see more and more of as things get tougher. So all these are really important things that we need to figure out how we support and help in whatever job and whatever aspect of our career that we're in. And then the final one of those themes that we dig into is governance, right? And what's flawed about governance today? What are we getting wrong? I mean, it's probably easy to see when we look at what's happening in the public domain, and you know, looking at the UK elections now, for example, you can sort of see that we really have a lot of challenges on our hands. But what are fundamentally the things that make governance fail, and what we can do differently to help that situation? So I think in those three themes, people can find themselves in any one of them. They can find something related to what they literally do every day.
Yeah.
And then we go into three parts of the book where we deal first with you. So it's sort of about your self-mastery and how people get to the point of having gravitas to make change happen. It is really about going deep within before you step out, right? So that first bit is about digging deep. The second bit is about you moving out into the world. So how you interact with the world and the impact that you make there, and how to leverage that impact, how to enhance that impact, so to speak, with the positive messages that you bring. And then the third part of the book is about how to make it stick. So it's really about settling into your new role, your new position, or the change that you're trying to make, and making something scalable happen within, let's say, your first 90 days. So it's a career transition book, but it's a book that I would say is more about the transition of your mind, more than necessarily physically changing your career, because you can use the book for any part of the journey that you're in today.
Oh, well, I can't wait to read it. Even listening to you explain it there, and I've obviously seen the reviews and everything else, and really amazing reviews. But like even there, I can think of things that I could pick up on for myself, even though I've been in this space for a long time. But I think you're so right as well, especially that you know, anyone can influence and change and do something. And you know, a lot of the work that I do is in B2B space, but just being on the sustainability committee or championing sustainability within your business and asking questions and showing an interest is going to make a huge difference. For people that you know, they want to make that switch into a purpose-driven career, what would your advice be? Because a lot of people they're like, you know, both me and you have done it. We've made that switch from big corporate into purpose-driven. What would your advice be from your journey?
Yeah, I mean, oh, there's so many things I could talk about this. I mean, I think the first thing that I say to everybody is make sure that you're safe with this, because it takes time to build what you're trying to build.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would actually recommend if you want to make that pivot is to start from within and where you are, to see how you can leverage and influence change. Try to make those steps already in the current situation that you're in. You will get a lot of information for yourself as well about how you're able to stick to things,
Yeah.
how you're able to champion things, what language you're using, how that language works, how your influence can be leveraged. But you need to have a lot of, I want to say, charisma and gravitas in order to make change happen. And it doesn't mean that the introverts can't, but you just need to find a vehicle to allow your voice to be heard, right? And
Yeah.
if you're an introvert, for example, maybe it's in how you display information, how you present facts. It's like my partner is quite introverted, but he's brilliant at data visualization. So he can
Yeah.
tell stories with data, which he can't do with the normal language. And so finding your particular voice is going to be really, really important on this journey. I think that's probably the first thing. Is like, don't just jump into wanting to be a change maker without knowing the vehicle that you're going to
Yeah.
use. The second thing would be about making sure that you're safe financially in the business models you create, right? So I like to talk about making not just a business model, but an impact model as well. And I think both sides are important. You need a vehicle to bring income in because you still need to live. You also need a vehicle to push impact out. And that's going to be essential when you design whatever it is you're designing, making sure that you're touching the right groups, that you have a clear target in mind of the groups that you want to influence, whether you want to do it from an environmental perspective. So if you want to have impact on things like water availability or energy or things like this, you have to have a plan for that. But also on the social side, like if you want to make social impacts, know whose lives you want to change. The other thing I would suggest is to really start locally as much as possible. And I say this with sort of tongue in cheek, because I definitely did not. In this way, it's kind of unusual the way that I've done this, but I built my business based on having that international exposure that I had during my career, and not necessarily living in Southampton, which is where I live in the UK. Even though I do volunteer in the Chamber of Commerce Green Steering Group in Southampton in Hampshire, it's really not the mainstay of my business. I almost do no business in Southampton at all. But I find that if you're able to get that local footing in what you're doing, you do get a lot of support from your local community, and then you can go beyond. I already had an international market, so I had to appeal to that international market, which is why I started where I started. And that's been good for me. We were talking before about the journey that I had with Where Ideas Launch. And when I launched the podcast, it was in the first weekend, I was listened to in something like 30 countries already. So this was just a matter of the number of connections I'd made everywhere in the world, right? And I've been top 10 in something like 19 different charts across, fantastic. I think it's 16 countries. So that's really good. I mean, to get to the top 10 of any charts takes a bit, and it takes some concentrated effort, but I had that natural market. So that was another thing. And I guess that the way to turn this into advice is to use what you have, right? And understand what you have and what you can leverage in order to make the impact that you want to make. So these are quite key things. And I think the final thing I would say is to be patient, because this is a long game. This is not something where you're going to wake up tomorrow morning and it's going to be all fine. You have to be consistent, you have to be patient, and you constantly have to be building your brand. And building what you stand for. And building your brand is not just something, nice fonts and graphics and colors, even though it's part of it, it's part of the memorable aspect of it, but it's really deeply about your value system. And so having people see those values being applied time and time again is how you get there. It's really how you get there. So it took me a podcast, a best-selling book, and a couple of other things to get to this point where now people want to speak to me, right? People want to invite me onto their shows and stuff like this. But this is all part of something that I've been building for the last 3 years. So Be patient with yourself. And sometimes there's a point I think I want to make here about sub-optimizing before you optimize. In anything, there's going to be compromise, right? So at times you're going to have to consider working with someone who may not yet share your values if you see the opportunity to shift their thinking, because especially when you're purpose driven and you're value driven, you want to connect with people who share those values, but that's not where change is made. So you're going to need to figure out where you want to be able to, I don't want to say step back. It's not about walking back your values at all. It's about taking a step to help someone who's not yet achieving what they could be, their full potential on the sustainability journey, and how you help them get there. So it's not really about judging and saying that your value system isn't good enough for me. It's really about working with others to see how you can influence change. So make sure to look backward too.
That's so powerful, and honestly, you're so inspirational. I follow you all the time, and I read all your stuff, and you make a difference in my life. And it's, as I say, with the group, it's been so powerful for me to be involved and to see others going, as small businesses. But what's next for you?
So I have a lot of projects on. I mean, the book has been huge, massive, exhausting, a number of things. But now that the book is done, the next big thing in my plan is to bring on this Women in Sustainable Business Awards. So we're calling it the WISBs. And the idea behind the WISBs is to bring people together around the sustainability conversation and acknowledge the achievements of small businesses in this space. So we do have definitely a focus on smaller businesses, but we also want to bring about a bit more change for them by inviting people to act sort of as sponsors and to give grants and funding. So the idea behind this is that we will have a few awards in different categories, recognizing all the different ways that sustainability is playing out. But we also want to have a sort of, for want of a better word, a dragon's den. We don't expect that there'll be dragons with any fire or anything, but we expect to be able to have maybe 10 businesses that really want to pitch a great idea and to get some funding for that idea. So that's going to be a part of the whole show. We're going to have learning resources. We're going to have people coming in to speak and share some insight on their journeys. Some of the exciting brands that I've interviewed on my podcast as well, I'll bring on. So it's really going to be a nice show, an all-day online event, targeted to all the different time zones. So every time zone will have their own experience of the awards, because we will have different things on at different times. But the idea is that we try to integrate as much as possible all the different aspects of running a global sustainable business.
Oh, that sounds so exciting, and I can't wait to see it when it goes live and support you and help you promote it. Honestly, I really enjoyed this conversation. There's loads of snippets I've taken out of it, and I just want to say thank you for building your community and for doing what you do, because you have a really powerful message, and I hope that everybody goes and buys the book, and I'll make sure that I put a link in. But thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Sam. You've been a great support. You've given me loads of advice, especially as I get started on this WISBs journey. So thank you so much for your help, and really appreciate you as well.
Oh, thank you. Have a good day.
Cheers.